What's here?
Everyone remembers the Monte Carlo, black, lowered, hydraulics thumping down Crenshaw like it owned the boulevard, because it did. But there is another car from Training Day that almost nobody talks about, and the story of what happened to it after the camera stopped rolling is stranger, sadder, and more revealing about how Hollywood treats its own history than almost anything I have come across. A 1979 Buick Riviera, gold, enormous, and carrying more cultural weight per square inch than most cars carry in a lifetime. It was there for one of the most chilling scenes in the entire film, and then it was gone. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle. The World Training Day came from... Before we can talk about the Riviera, we need to talk about the world this film came from, because on Training Day, nothing was chosen without a reason. Not the locations, not the casting, not the cars. David Ayer wrote the original script in 1995. He grew up in South Central Los Angeles. He knew these streets from the inside, not from a research trip, not from a consultant's notes, from living there. The script was sharp, uncomfortable, and deeply personal, a portrait of corruption inside the LAPD that felt almost too specific to be fiction. Then, in 1998 and 1999, the Rampart scandal broke. Officers inside the LAPD's anti-gang crash unit were found to have been robbing drug dealers, planting evidence, and running what amounted to a criminal operation inside the department. What Ayer had written as a character study suddenly read like documentary journalism, and Warner Brothers got very serious, very fast. Antoine Fuqua came aboard to direct and immediately made a decision that would define the entire production. He was not making this film on a backlot. He was not going to recreate South Central on a studio lot in Burbank. He was going to shoot in the actual neighborhoods the film depicted: Crenshaw Boulevard, Baldwin Village, the Imperial Courts housing projects in Watts. And he was going to earn the trust of those communities before he pointed a single camera at them. That process took months. Clay Shahid Sloan, the film's gang technical advisor, used his real community relationships to open doors that had never been opened for a film crew before. Imperial Courts, for instance, had never allowed a production inside. Fuqua got in. The production hired local gang members from the Rollins 60 Crips, PJ Watts Crips, and Black P Stones as extras. The founder of the Black P Stones in Baldwin Village was on set every day they filmed in his neighborhood. Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Macy Gray, not stunt casting. Credible faces in credible places. The reason I am spending time on all of this is because that same philosophy of absolute authenticity extended to every single prop, every location, and every vehicle on this production. Nothing was grabbed off a studio lot because it was available. Everything was chosen because it was right. And that is precisely why the 1979 Buick Riviera that shows up in the film's most quietly devastating scene is exactly the car it is. The Riviera, what it is, and why it matters.
Hey, grab that menu off that window for me, all right?
Now, let's talk about the Riviera itself, because if you grew up outside of a certain community in a certain era, you might look at this car and see a big, soft, old American land yacht that has nothing to do with anything. And you would be wrong. The Buick Riviera ran from 1963 through 2001 across several distinct generations, but the generation that matters here is the redesigned fourth generation that carried the nameplate from 1974 through 1979. That last model year, 1979, is the one that ends up on screen in Training Day, and it is a very specific object with a very specific meaning. By the late 1970s, the Riviera had grown. Federal regulations had strangled the performance numbers that defined American cars at the beginning of the decade. The Riviera was no longer a road-carving personal luxury coupe the way it had been in the mid-60s. It was something different: long, wide, front-wheel drive, which Buick had actually introduced on the Riviera back in 1966, making it one of the earliest American passenger cars to run that configuration. By '79, the car was running a 251 cubic inch V6 as the base engine, with a 301 V8 available as an upgrade, producing somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 140 horsepower, depending on the build. These were not performance numbers. Nobody was drag racing a '79 Riviera. That was not the point. The point was presence. The point was that long, formal roofline, the wide C-pillar, the hood that seemed to go on forever, and the way the car sat on the road like it was absolutely certain of its own importance. In gold, which is exactly what the training day car was, a Riviera of this generation reads as something earned, something that belongs to someone who has been around long enough to know exactly what they want and exactly how they want to arrive. In South Central and Compton and Inglewood during the 1980s and 90s, the full-size Buick, the Riviera, the Electra, the LeSabre, occupied a very specific cultural lane. These were old man cars in the best possible sense. Cars that said you had been in the neighborhood for a long time, that you had accumulated something, that you were not scrambling. A clean, gold, late 70s Riviera parked outside a house in South Central was a statement about stability and permanence and roots. In the world of training day, in the specific social hierarchy that film depicts, that car belongs to exactly the kind of person who owns it. That person is Smiley. Played by Clifton Collins Jr., Smiley is one of the members of the crew that Alonzo Harris has been running protection for, paying tribute to, and ultimately manipulating throughout the entire film. He is quiet, dangerous, and economical, with his words in a way that is far more frightening than anything louder. And when he steps out of or is associated with that gold Riviera in the scene where the film's entire moral architecture collapses, when Alonzo's relationship to the streets is finally fully revealed, the car is not background decoration. The car is punctuation. Denzel and the details.
These 5 sets of problems, you could be number 6 if you act right.
Here is the thing about Denzel Washington that gets completely lost whenever people talk about training day. The man was not a passenger in how this film got made. He was not showing up on set, hitting his marks, and leaving the world building to everyone else. Washington embedded himself in the material the same way Fuqua embedded the production in the actual streets. He spent time in the neighborhoods before a single camera rolled. He studied Rafael Perez, the real LAPD officer at the center of the Rampart scandal, so closely that he modeled Alonzo's goatee directly on the man's face. He understood, in a way that not every actor bothers to understand, that the community watching this film would know within 30 seconds whether what they were seeing was honest or performed. And performed was not an option. That same standard applied to everything around him, every prop, every location, every vehicle. According to people connected to the production, the vehicle choices for the supporting characters received the same level of attention that the Monte Carlo received. That might surprise you. The Monte Carlo is the car everyone talks about, the hero vehicle, the one with the hydraulics and the Crenshaw cruise and the Dr. Dre soundtrack moment. But Fuqua was not building a world where only the lead character's car was real and everything else was filler. The Riviera was not grabbed off a prop lot because it was available and roughly correct. It was selected because it was exactly correct. There is a difference, and on this production, that difference mattered. Now, finding a clean, period-accurate, gold, 1979 Buick Riviera in Los Angeles in the early 2000s was genuinely not easy. These were not sitting on used car lots in any kind of numbers. Late 70s full-size Buicks in good condition lived in driveways and garages and private hands, owned by people who had held on to them for years because that is the kind of car you hold on to. The production's vehicle coordinator had to actually go hunting. And what they found when they found it was a car that somebody had clearly taken care of. The exterior was clean, the color was right. And I want you to understand that color matters enormously on camera. A respray in the wrong shade of gold, even a close shade, reads completely differently under film lighting than original factory paint does. This car photographed correctly because it was correct. Now I want to be straight with you before we go any further, because this is the part of the story where the documentation gets thinner. The Riviera does not have a build record the way the Monte Carlo does. There is no name builder, no shop, no receipts to cross-reference. No Eddie Paul sitting down with the production and delivering 4 cars on a 2-week deadline. What we have is the car as it appears on screen, the sourcing context, and a paper trail that picks up and then very quickly drops off after filming wrapped. I will tell you what is confirmed, what is strongly indicated, and what is still an open question. That is the only honest way to do this. After the camera stopped, Here's what we know for certain, and I want to start here because the confirmed facts are actually important before we get into the murkier territory that follows. Training Day wrapped principal photography in late 2000. The film hit theaters in October 2001. By every standard measure of how a studio handled non-hero production vehicles in that era, the Riviera's fate was essentially decided the moment Fuqua called the last take. It would have been returned to its owner if it was sourced privately, sold through a prop disposal channel if it was studio acquired, or simply released back into the general market through whatever pipeline was most convenient. That was the process. That was always the process. Nobody was sitting in a Warner Brothers office in the fall of 2000 thinking about preservation. Nobody was pulling VINs and flagging vehicles for a future archive. That is just not how it worked. And here is the part that actually stings if you care about this stuff. Training Day was not a franchise production in 2001. Nobody knew what it was going to become. It came out the same year as the first Fast and the Furious, and the contrast between how those two productions handled their vehicles tells you everything. Fast and the Furious had manufacturers involved, promotional machinery spinning up, a studio that could already smell a sequel. The vehicles from that production had commercial value before the film even opened. Training Day had none of that. It was a crime drama with a serious pedigree and two extraordinary lead performances. But it was not a car movie. There was no infrastructure for preserving what it drove. So, by the time Denzel Washington stood on that Academy Awards stage in March 2002 and took home Best Actor, by the time the film settled into its permanent place in the conversation about great American cinema, by the time people started going back and watching it again and paying attention to every detail, the cars were already gone, already out in the world, already in the hands of people who may have had absolutely no idea what they were sitting on. The Monte Carlo survived as well as it did, relatively speaking, because it had a community with a stake in it. The lowrider world, the G-body enthusiast circuit, the Southern California car show culture. Those communities recognized that car as one of their own the moment the film dropped. They had a reason to track it. They had the knowledge base to identify it. They had people who cared whether it survived. The Gold Riviera had none of that working in its favor. It was a supporting character's car. Significant inside the film, absolutely, but not the car on the poster. Not the car in the trailer. Not the car that anyone was putting on a t-shirt or building a replica of in their garage. It did not generate that gravitational pull, and without that pull, there was nothing to slow it down, as it disappeared into the ordinary used car pipeline and became, to everyone who touched it next, just another old Buick. The trail goes cold, and then gets interesting. So, what actually happened to it? This is the question, and I want to be straight with you before we get into it. Some of what follows comes from forum threads, community sources, and conversations that were never documented in any official capacity. There is no studio archivist on record here. There is no certified provenance chain. What there is a trail, and I'm going to walk it with you honestly, and tell you exactly where it holds, and exactly where it does not. In the years immediately following the film's release, the online paper trail is almost completely flat. Occasional posts surfaced on classic Buick forums and full-size American car enthusiast boards. People mentioning a gold '79 Riviera with some vague connection to a film production. Someone who knew someone who saw it somewhere. None of it was specific enough to mean anything. And the fundamental problem is simple. The greater Los Angeles area in the early 2000s had dozens of gold late 70s Rivieras in private hands at any given time. These were not rare sightings. They were common cars in certain neighborhoods, held by long-term owners who maintained them quietly and drove them without any awareness that one of their neighbors might be a piece of film history. Without a VIN, without a single piece of production documentation, without something that tied a specific chassis to a specific filming location on a specific date, every lead was a maybe. And maybes do not hold up. Then the trail gets slightly warmer, slightly. I want to be careful with that word, because I have seen people in this space take a lukewarm lead and build a whole confirmed narrative around it, and that is not what we are doing here. But there is a thread, posted somewhere around 2006 or 2007, on one of the larger old-school lowrider community boards, in which a user described buying a gold '79 Riviera from a family in the Inglewood area. The family had acquired it, according to the poster, through what sounded very much like a studio disposal sale. a vehicle that came out of a production pipeline rather than a private driveway. The poster was not making any film history claims. He was not trying to establish provenance or generate interest. He was asking about restoration parts for a big Buick he had just picked up, which is exactly the kind of post that contains the most accidentally useful information. And buried in that parts request were details that stopped me cold when I found it. Mounting points on the body that had no business being on a stock 1979 Riviera. Wiring runs that had clearly been added by someone and then incompletely removed, the kind of half-stripped electrical work you see on a film vehicle after the production equipment gets pulled out and nobody bothers to finish the cleanup. The location was right, the year was right, the color was right. The anomalies were exactly the kind of ghost evidence a working movie car leaves behind when it gets wiped down. Stripped of its rigging and handed off to the next owner with no explanation. The poster stopped responding to follow-up questions within a few weeks. The thread eventually dropped off the active pages and got buried under years of newer posts. No VIN was ever shared. No second confirmation ever surfaced. And that is where that particular lead ends. Not with a closed door exactly, but with an unanswered knock that nobody has gone back to try again. The cultural weight of what got lost. Here is what I keep coming back to, and I want to sit with this for a minute because I think it is the part of the story that hits hardest once you have followed the whole trail. The Buick Riviera in Training Day is not an accident. It is not a prop coordinator grabbing whatever was available on short notice and hoping nobody noticed. It is a precisely chosen object inside a film where precision was the entire operating principle. Antoine Fuqua did not shoot in watts because it was convenient. David Ayer did not write that script from the outside looking in. The communities that opened their streets, their neighborhoods, their actual homes to this production did not do that carelessly. Every single decision on this film was made with intention, and the vehicles were no exception. That gold Riviera was chosen because it was the right car for the right character in the right world. Full stop. And then it went into a pipeline that treated it like a used appliance. I want to be clear that this is not unusual. That is almost the worst part. This is the completely standard outcome for a non-hero production vehicle from a 2000 Warner Brothers film that was not yet understood to be a cultural landmark. The studio did not fail Training Day specifically. The studio did what studios did, and what they largely still do, which is move vehicles out of inventory as efficiently as possible once the production closes. There was no malice. There was no negligence in any legal sense. There was just a system that was never designed to ask whether a supporting character's car from a crime drama might matter to anyone in 20 years. But here is the thing. Some of these cars come back. That is what makes the whole subject worth following. The Bullitt Mustang spent 50 years in a barn and came back. The SVT Lightnings from the first Fast and the Furious were sitting in complete anonymity, unrecognized, about to be parted out. And someone got there just in time. The Dirty Mary Crazy Larry Charger is in a backyard in Sun Valley right now. Original paint, original wheels, not for sale. Known only to the people who already know. These cars survive by accident when they survive at all. And the only thing that separates the ones that come back from the ones that disappear permanently is whether somebody cared enough to go looking before it was too late. The gold Riviera deserved that somebody. Not because of what it would fetch at auction, though a fully documented screen-used vehicle from an Academy Award-winning film with verified production provenance would have a serious conversation at Barrett-Jackson, conservatively north of $100,000, possibly well beyond that depending on the day in the room. It deserved better than what it got because of what it represented, because of the community whose identity it carried, because of the film that chose it so carefully and the world that film was trying to honor. That kind of intentionality does not just belong in a pipeline. It belongs somewhere people can see it. Where it might be now. Where does the trail stand right now? Genuinely unclear, and I would rather tell you that than dress up a guess as a conclusion. There is no confirmed chassis. There is no museum with a display card. There is no auction record linking a specific VIN to the film. What there is a community of people who care about this kind of history. And a film that keeps finding new audiences who want to know everything about how it was made and what became of its pieces. If the car exists in anything approaching its original configuration, it is almost certainly in private hands in the Los Angeles area. That is not a guess, that is just statistics. Rivieras of that generation that got used hard, cleaned out, and resold in the early 2000s stayed close to where they were sold. They did not travel. They did not get shipped to collectors in other states the way a Ferrari or a high-profile muscle car would. They went to the next owner in the same zip code, and the next owner after that. The Riviera from Training Day is either still somewhere in the greater Los Angeles basin, worn and unrecognized, or it was parted out at some point in the last 20 years, and is gone in the way that working cars eventually go. I genuinely do not know which of those is true, and that is the honest ending to this particular story. Not a barn find, not a restoration reveal, just an open question sitting at the end of a trail that went cold sometime around 2007. If you know something, and I mean something specific, a VIN, a name, a location, a thread I have not found yet, the comment section below is wide open, and I read every single one. That is not a bit. I actually do. Even the ones telling me I got something wrong, especially those, honestly. Nothing improves research like someone who actually knows showing up to correct the record. The Training Day cars deserve a full accounting. The Monte Carlo got its story. Alonso's World got its documentation. The gold Riviera, Smiley's car, the car that sat in the driveway during one of the most chilling scenes in American crime cinema, is still out there somewhere, and it deserves to be found. My name is Johnny. This is American Muscle. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what we find next. We are just getting started, and the next lane is already open. See you there.